So, today we are going to be discussing the national phenomenon of exploitation. And this is all across America. We are finding in our research that exploitation is a really big problem among D1 athletic programs, specifically in their revenue sports, which includes basketball and football programs across the country. In our presentation today, we will be discussing three different things. One is we will be giving you a written definition of what exploitation is, what makes up exploitation, and basically how we analyzed it in order to conduct this research. We will also be discussing different subtopics based on what issues that we have found in our research that really play into these college programs. And our third thing is that we will be discussing different resolutions and how we can resolve these issues that we will be discussing today. Our different subtopics throughout this presentation will include insurance liability, socioeconomic status, program unionization, pay to play, and different racial differences between collegiate athletes. With that being said, our first subtopic discussed is going to be programming unionization.
All right, so as Mary told you, I am focusing on my research on programming unionization. So basically, the idea of unionization for these athletes is they are trying to form, like I said, they're trying to come together and try to get paid, try to get some sort of income, get benefits for playing basketball and football at their respective institutions. The biggest example was at the end of the 2013 season, football season. Northwestern University, I saw in a report, actually made close to $50 million in revenue off their football program. And as a result, the football players didn't get much in return. So, led by their quarterback, they decided to file a motion to unionize and become full-time employees at the university. And this was a big deal. This was a big deal because it opened up. This was a landmark motion because this opened up the questions, opened up opportunities for other athletes at different schools. Hey, should we have the opportunity to unionize and have the opportunity to get certain benefits and better working conditions and health care and stuff like that? So they filed the motion with the National Labor Relations Board, and in March 2014, a regional director from Chicago actually voted in favor of having the Northwestern football players be a legitimate union at Northwestern. So at first, you would hear them; they would get their benefits. All they wanted for, they can negotiate with the institution. So even though they were satisfied with the decision, what they wanted to do was take that decision to the national level, so they could become like a huge impact for college athletics. So they sent the decision to the Federal National Labor Relations Board in Washington, D.C., and for nearly a year, basically, a lot of people were concerned like what the big decision would be and how it would turn out and how it would affect other people, not only just the players, but coaches, administrators at the institutions, at the NCAA. So nearly 16 months they waited for a decision. And it wasn't until August 2015 where the National Labor, NLRB, basically rejected and also explained the reasoning why they rejected the motion, because they felt they had no really jurisdiction in the situation. So because of that, Northwestern is not a union. However, it's come up to a lot of questions, and it's opened up opportunities for other institutions and players to form unions and try to get some of the revenue, some benefits from what the school gets from these big Division I sports.
So today I'll be talking about socioeconomic status within the NCAA and the revenue sports that we're particularly looking at. So since we all said we were going to tie in our majors and fields of study, I thought that I would begin by explaining to you what social conflict theory is. That's a sociological theory coined by Karl Marx that basically says in a society there are those with more resources and those with less resources, and those with more will try to exploit those with less using the power that they have. And so I will apply that theory to the NCAA as a whole and these educational institutions, their administrations really exploiting these players for their talent and for their athletic ability rather than their academic success. So when you step back and you look at sports as a whole, it's sort of a myth that sports are seen as sort of an opportunity for social mobility, because when you look at it, they're really segregated by social class. You have those who play in a public facility and can't afford much equipment, so they play basketball and they play football. And then you have those with more access, more resources, come from a higher social class. They can afford hockey equipment. They can afford lacrosse equipment. They use private, nice facilities that they pay for. And this right off the bat stratifies what you're able to play, what sports you play. And so right off the bat, these people from lower socioeconomic statuses become really good at basketball and really good at football, and they get recruited by colleges and universities to play for them because of their talent. And the majority of them will not graduate. I read a statistic that said about only half of them will graduate. And zooming in particularly on African American student athletes, when you look at statistics from Ohio State, for example, 38% of African American student athletes will graduate in comparison to 71% of all student athletes. Or at UNC, it's 51% of African American student athletes will graduate in comparison to 74% of all student athletes. And this really showcases the fact that these educational administrations are exploiting those from a lower socioeconomic status because they know that they have more athletic prowess, really, to create a successful team than those who come from a different social class. And so, yeah, that's basically the gist of what I'm talking about.
My subtopic is going to touch on academic fraud and the racial differences and things like that. But I think it would be really interesting to see how not only the reasoning why they're committing academic fraud, but who's supposed to be keeping them held accountable. A lot of times it's their coaches who should be keeping them on track. Although whenever you get into big institutions like the Big Ten and things like that, they kind of play into personal interests, and coaches are also getting paid. Everyone's making a lot of money, and then everyone kind of gets sidetracked, and then academic fraud happens just to keep the players on the team and keep the system going. But not only that, my topic kind of delves into why academic fraud happens in the first place on a whole, and that will tie into socioeconomic status, where a lot of these athletes are going to be coming from demographically and things like that. So that's what my topic will be about.
So ending with that on the socioeconomic status, I am talking about health insurance and the lack thereof. So most of these kids come to school and they are lacking in the education, and say they do get injured while they're playing. They are leaving school with no education, no insurance, and they're kind of just at a loss. So with that information, I want to just dive into that and find more research.